Awesome. You are the brave group who stayed until the end. So it's my job to keep you awake. So I won't spend any time on introduction, only to say that my full-time job is writing about diabetes. And so every day I'm seeing what the new news is, learning about new devices, testing stuff in my own life, and then writing about what I think can actually move the needle. So I want to spend just a couple seconds on telling my story with diabetes because I think it's very relevant for everything that comes after. I was diagnosed at age 12. This is the most awkward, ridiculous picture I could find from around that time. Note the Oreo and milk, which was my snack of choice. And I think what's really interesting about when I was diagnosed with diabetes is that I am the oldest of 6 kids. So responsibility is my middle name. I was diagnosed at age 12, and I really did everything from a very young age. Took my injections, got on a pump, took my finger sticks, dosed my insulin, counted carbs from a pretty young age. And I mention this because just the fact that I was responsible and did what I was told to do did not mean that I had good outcomes as a young person with diabetes. So when I look back on that time, we struggled. I mean, my A1C was always in the 8 to 9% range, still working hard, but that's an average, right? So fluctuating from 40 to 400 all of the time. And I think there were 3 really big problems. So one was when I was diagnosed, I was told, manage your diabetes or else you're gonna have long-term complications. That's not motivating for any young person with diabetes, ever. So connecting the benefits of doing all of this diabetes work to something that long-term was not very compelling for me. The second was I was told, you can eat whatever you want with diabetes, as long as you take insulin for it. That advice set us up for many years of failure. Because when you eat whatever you want with diabetes and just take insulin for it, you are in for a heck of a roller coaster ride. No one ever told us that when we were diagnosed. And the last was, I was only taking 3 to 4 finger sticks per day. So when you think about, imagine driving a car across the country and you only get to look out of the windshield 3 times a day to see where you're going. That's what living with diabetes on 3 to 4 finger sticks per day is like. So I just did not have enough data to learn, to make decisions, to figure out what was working and what wasn't. So there were 3 really pivotal turning points that I look back on and say those were moments that changed my trajectory. The first was in college. I started taking a few nutrition classes because I was really interested in nutrition. And wow, I learned that actually I can't eat what I want with diabetes and just take insulin for it. The second was that guy in the middle was my roommate in college, which will definitely teach you a thing or two about what you eat and how many reps you can do and other various things that weird bodybuilders do. And then on the right, I started interning at diatribe.org, where I still work today. And I went to a conference in the summer of 2010 in Keystone, Colorado. And there was a panel of people with diabetes talking about continuous glucose monitoring. I'd never heard of this. Never heard of the technology. It was still pretty new. That's actually, I went to the lobby and I called up Dexcom because I was so convinced by what these people with diabetes were saying. And I ordered what was then the Dexcom 7 Plus, which is funny because it looks so antiquated when you look back at it now. I mean, the fact that we get CGM on our phones, but that's what I got on. And talk about a way to accelerate my learning curve with diabetes. I've worn CGM now for over 60,000 hours, so I've seen a lot. And the book that I hope everyone in the audience has, and if you don't, we have some left, so let me know. The book that I wrote based on this and the columns that I write in Diatribe are based on so much of that learning wearing CGM. And so one of the things that I'm really interested in are these, what I call bright spots versus landmine moments. So we all have these facepalm moments with diabetes, right? The number on the meter is 268 and you just don't understand what happened. Or, you did the same thing yesterday as today and you got totally different results. And I call these diabetes landmines because they're these these mistakes that we make that can explode into out-of-range blood sugar. So I'm 40 and I go to the fridge and I eat whatever looks delicious in the fridge, and then I'm 280, and then I rage bolus, and then I'm back down to 40 again, right? So I call that a diabetes landmine because it's something I stumble on. It explodes into this annoying thing that I never wanted to happen. And we're all really good at pinpointing those and finding those and beating ourselves up when we step on them. What we do a really crappy job of is identifying bright spots, which are the things that are going right that we should be doing more often. So a way to think about this is, what's actually going well in my diabetes that I should keep doing? What happens on my best days? So on the days where my blood sugar does stay in range for much of the day, what happened? What did I do? What did I eat? What was my schedule? How can I have a day like that tomorrow? What foods and decisions actually keep my glucose in range? You can see how these questions are framed differently, and it's not an intuitive way of thinking with diabetes. We all focus on mistakes, the times where blood sugars are going high and low. And the key with bright spots is to ask, how can I do those things more often? That's what my book is mainly about, is identifying bright spots, pinpointing them, and figuring out how to replicate them. What we're all really good at is identifying diabetes landmines. What are the mistakes I make that drive my blood sugar way off the rails? What happens on my really challenging days where nothing seems to go right? You know, when I'm in a really bad mood, what is driving that? And I think what's important about diabetes landmines is if you can identify them up front, then you can build a system, a plan of attack so that you stumble on them less often. So a great example is what I call the hypoglycemia binge, when you're low and you go to the fridge and eat. And I'll talk a little bit later about how I steer clear of that landmine. And another way to think about this is, if I want to improve, where should I focus my efforts? When we see a CGM trace like that, for people who aren't on CGM, that's a 24-hour plot of my data, with the black line being my glucose at every 5 minutes. We're really good at identifying the things going wrong. So your eye is drawn immediately to the blood sugar spike and then the massive drop. And so we could come up with strategies to avoid that, to not have that happen tomorrow. But what we miss are the bright spots. So here's a solid 9-hour period where my blood sugar was flat. Didn't move. What happened? What was driving that? How can I have that happen tomorrow? That's the kind of thinking that I hope we can start to bring to diabetes. And what's really important to notice is that CGM is a great landmine detection technology. It will tell you exactly when you're doing something wrong. It will not tell you when you're doing things right. So that's just something to keep in mind for people who wear CGM. And I'll just rip through some of the parts of the book that I think are interesting. I know we have maybe 25 minutes left, but please, you know, hopefully everyone got a copy. If you don't, you can pick one up here. JDRF bought one for everyone, so that's a huge thank you to JDRF. If we can give them a round of applause. The other cool thing is, since we're a nonprofit, we make this available for free. So anyone can download it for free. They just have to put in their email address and they can get it for free. And the 4 chapters are food, mindset, exercise, and sleep. And I'm gonna focus on food and mindset just for time constraints. But I think these are my 2 favorite chapters in the book, anyways, and they happen to be first. So when I've tested a lot of different diets head to head. So I try to do as much to manage my diabetes the same as possible, and I eat low carb, high fat versus normal carb, low fat diet. The results are very consistent. They pretty much always look like this. The way on the left is the way that I eat now, which is a pretty low-carb approach. And the way on the right is the roller coaster that I experienced after diagnosis. And I've tested this many, many times, and the results are very consistent. And I'm a really big fan of sharing my own data, because I'm not just up here saying that this works, but not actually. I want to actually put some proof behind that. So this is the 90 days of blood sugar data that I share in the book. And you can see my average is very consistent. The range is really tight in the 70 to 140 about 80% of the day. And my average glucose is around 120. And what I think people miss with this is that it takes less work to do this when you eat a low-carb diet. Because when you're eating more carbs per meal, you're constantly making mistakes on carb counting. You're taking huge doses of insulin. The insulin is absorbed unpredictably. My bolus, I don't really carb count anymore because I just take like 1 or 2 units based on what I'm eating. And so not only does it deliver better glucose outcomes, but the work required, the amount of chasing and frustration and anger is actually lower, which I think is perhaps even more important than just the glucose outcomes. And this is data from earlier this year that I pulled. This is my 90-day clarity data. And I just want to point to the number of times that I'm very low or very high is less than half of 1%, because when you eat less than 30 grams of carbs per meal and you forget to bolus, you go up to 160 or 180. You don't go up to 250 or 280 or 350. And so I found this to be really helpful for managing my diabetes. And then people say, all right, fine. Okay, it seems to work for you, but what do you actually eat? Come on. And I'll say that I choose different things to eat than people, but you can totally bring this into your life, and you can start with doing it one meal at a time. So the time to focus on this is breakfast, which I'll talk about in a second, but for breakfast, I eat chia pudding every morning, which, has anyone tried it in the room? A few thoughts? Yeah? I see a few thumbs up. I'll talk about it in a second. Instead of eggs with a side of potatoes, I ask for greens. Instead of making normal pizza or ordering pizza, I make it with almond flour. We make fajitas at home, but I buy these awesome low-carb, high-fiber tortillas that don't have an impact on glucose. Instead of white rice, we actually make cauliflower rice or broccoli rice. You can actually shred up a cauliflower or broccoli. It has the consistency of rice, but it doesn't impact your glucose. I still eat waffles, but I make them with almond flour and eggs. So there are a lot of ways to get super creative about eating low carb. And I think breakfast, for people where this seems like a crazy tall order to implement in your life, just do this at breakfast. You can definitely do this at breakfast because there's a lot. You can eat eggs, you can eat waffles, you can eat pancakes, you can do chia pudding. And breakfast is key because it's the perfect storm for high blood sugars. Stress in the morning, which causes highs. Caffeine, if you're an adult, which causes highs, or if you're a tired teenager. Caffeine causes high blood sugars. Most breakfasts are really high in carbs and high glycemic carbs that spike your blood sugar quickly. Most people, myself included, are insulin resistant in the morning, so you actually need more insulin at breakfast. So if you want a perfect storm for high blood sugars, go right to breakfast to find it. And to me, that's a place where we can have leverage. If we can actually just implement this toolkit that works at breakfast, then the whole rest of the day is off to a better start. So that's what I would say. If low carb sounds difficult or challenging or daunting, try it at breakfast. And just to give you some perspective, this is what I think a lot of people would say is a typical healthy breakfast. This is unsweetened Greek yogurt, berries, and an apple. I took insulin for this 20 minutes before I ate a single bite. I measured out every single carb. And you can see I went from 116 or 118 to 250, 260 very quickly. And then I crashed right back down into the 40s. And this is what I'm talking about with the types of breakfasts and things that we're often told to eat is it's a lot of carbs at once. You need to take the insulin way in advance to have any prayer of managing it. And then you have all this insulin hanging around that can cause lows. So another beauty about things like chia pudding is you don't have to pre-bolus. You can actually bolus right when you start. And if you miss the bolus, the consequences are not as severe. So if you've never heard of chia pudding, go to the Diatribe article to look it up. It takes about 3 minutes to make. It doesn't require cooking. And basically, chia seeds look like poppy seeds. They don't taste like anything, but I mix a quarter cup with half a cup of water. And when you stir it up, it makes this nice gel that, again, doesn't taste like anything, but it's all fiber is basically what it is, and omega-3 fats. So I put nuts in there, seeds. I know a lot of parents make this for their kids now. They'll put chocolate chips in there. They'll make it with a little bit of milk instead of water. And kids seem to really like this, and I've benefited massively from it. I've probably eaten this 300 or 400 times. And the glucose response pretty much always looks like the one on the left. It's pretty much a flat line, and you can take 1 unit of insulin right as I take 1 unit as I start eating, and if I miss a bolus, it doesn't honestly look that different. So chia pudding is one I really recommend people with type 1 try. I'll just rip through a few other food tips that I found really helpful. Side dishes are so difficult with type 1. Figuring out how much is on the plate, how much to bolus for, is this what's the sauce on here? And so my go-to strategy in restaurants, at home, is to replace normal side dishes with veggies. And I know this can be difficult for kids, but if you can find veggies that your kids like, and you can replace it with rice, with potatoes, and it has such a smaller impact on glucose, keeps you full, and it's hard to overeat a lot of veggies, whereas it's pretty easy to overeat most of the things that drive our blood sugars crazy. I also make pasta out of zucchini, so you can spiralize a zucchini and make pasta with it. I've also been trying kelp noodles recently, which don't have any carbs either, and so there's lots of ways to go low carb, but to still have pasta, to still have ramen, to still have things that you actually enjoy that are pretty high in carbs. And the low-carb community is actually quite creative about this stuff. I mentioned riced cauliflower a little bit earlier, so I'll just say that a lot of stores now sell this pre-blended, and you can blend this at home. If you prefer that, you just actually get a head of cauliflower and shred it up in a blender. And I make stir-fried rice with it. And again, what I love about all these things is they're very predictable on blood sugar, so they take so many of the variables out of the equation. I'm just going to mention bread substitutes real quick. I buy these, La Tortilla Factory makes these awesome low-carb, high-fiber tortillas. It's in the top left of the picture there. And they're 10 grams of carbs each, 7 grams from fiber. So again, very little glycemic impact. You do fajitas, sandwiches, quesadillas. Some people do pizzadillas, I guess. So there's all kinds of things you can do with these that I found really helpful. And then the low-carb community is very creative about almond flour and coconut flour, and so making waffles and pancakes and breads is, again, really helpful too. And it's funny, that I eat a lot of nuts and seeds as a snack, and this was my birthday in January, and our team knows how I eat, so they made me a nut birthday cake. So if you actually look, there's almonds that say HBD Adam, which I thought was pretty awesome. This is also why it helps to educate people around you about your eating, because they will often, I mean, not always, but they will often go out of their way to make accommodations for you. And our team just knows, like, if they had got me a birthday cake, I wouldn't have eaten it. So it's just really helpful, I think, sometimes to be quite open about what is helpful for you and what is very unhelpful for you, and to make that clear with the people around you. I'm gonna talk about the hypoglycemia binge real quick. This is a real screenshot of my CGM from a few years ago. My roommate worked at Google, and Googlers get a lot of free food. So he brought home a giant, like a football helmet-sized bowl of granola, and had it like in the middle of our fridge. Like, imagine like a light shining on it, like, ooh. And I woke up at 40 and went to the fridge, and of course opened the fridge, ooh, saw the granola, and I'm telling you, I only had a little bit. I promise you, I only had a little bit. And you can see I went to 265, and that's how I started my day. So I spent all night with high blood sugar, and then I started the day at 265. And has anyone ever had this happen? Overdone a low? Only one person in the room has overdone a low. I'll just walk off stage. So how do you get around this? So this is a great example of a diabetes landmine, because it happens repeatedly. We can set up a system to avoid it, which is awesome. So the way that I avoid lows is I, one, never use them as an excuse to eat junk food. Think about the logic of that. Something you want to avoid, you're then rewarding yourself for experiencing. It's crazy. So we should never use lows as an excuse to eat junk food. And it really helps to have a go-to automatic low blood sugar correction that is A, unappealing to overeat, and B, you can actually dose it. So I use glucose tabs for both of those reasons, but I know that one tab raises me 20 points. So if I'm at 60, I need 2 tabs. So I dose low corrections just like I dose insulin. And that's really helpful for avoiding this from happening because I'm never going to eat like 42 glucose tabs. It's just not going to happen. The other thing is if you wear CGM, be careful because CGM does lag in hypoglycemia. So if your CGM says you're low and then you treat and then it still says you're low, be careful not to overeat because you might have actually recovered and the CGM is just not picking it up yet. So before you overeat, check on a meter before moving on, if that makes sense. Okay. I'll talk a little bit about mindset, and then I don't know if we have time for questions after, but I'll be here for a while. So this goes to what I was told when I was diagnosed, which is the reason to take care of your diabetes is to avoid long-term complications. And as I said, that's not motivating for a lot of young people. I think it's not that motivating for a lot of adults. And on days where you're burned out with diabetes, this is not that motivating. So one of the things I like to do is reframe the benefits of blood sugars and why should I keep them in range? Why does it matter to keep my blood sugar in range? It's not just about long-term complications. It's that it matters today. It actually matters right now. And so I will tell you, I am a lame person to be around when my blood sugar is out of range. I'm grumpy, I'm tired, I'm short-tempered, I'm unfocused, I'm like there's nothing good about me when my blood sugar is out of range. And by contrast, I like to say that when my blood sugar is in range, it's when I'm my best self. And when I'm feeling exhausted by diabetes or unmotivated, I don't focus on myself, I focus on the people around me. And I don't want to be a rotten brother to my siblings or a rotten boyfriend to my girlfriend or a rotten coworker and have blood sugars out of range. So the motivator for me is actually being my best self to the people around me. And that's the reason that I focus on taking care of my blood sugar, taking care of my diabetes, trying to keep my blood sugar in range because I just want to be the best person I can be for those around me. I think it's more motivating than avoiding long-term complications. It's also more empowering. Instead of avoiding this negative outcome, it's how can I be the best version of myself? Another thing, especially for people on CGM, is this idea of feeling like a failure when the blood sugars are out of range. Feeling like you're no good at diabetes. As a parent, feeling like you're failing your young one if their blood sugars are out of range. And I think this is one of the most important points in the book, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it. Because we should all remember that blood sugar numbers are information to make a decision. They are not judgments, they are not good, they are not bad, they are not tests. I've banned our team from using the word tests because test implies a grade, which implies there's good and bad. We should be celebrating every time there's a data point to make a decision about diabetes. Imagine if you're driving a car. A speedometer is a really helpful tool to know how fast you're going. A clear windshield is a really helpful tool. This is why numbers on the meter, CGMs, are so valuable because they give us a speedometer so that we can drive better. Another way to frame this is my little bright spots plane here. Imagine that you're a pilot and you're flying a 15-hour flight. And you look at, you're flying the plane and you look at the instrument panel and you're like, oh my God, the plane is actually going a little off course and it's going a little too fast. I'm the worst pilot ever. How could I screw up so badly? I'm terrible at this. And you're sitting there beating yourself up. Would any pilot ever do that? They would look at the instrument panel. They would say, wow, the plane is actually flying a little bit off course. Let me course correct the plane. And they would keep flying. That is how we should think about blood sugars. Information to make a decision, data points. It's our instrument panel to better manage diabetes. And I think what happens is when we attach all this blame and shame and good and bad to blood sugars, all it motivates me to do when I was a teenager was to check less often. If I'm going to get a bad grade on the test, I'd rather take fewer tests, which is really unhelpful. So we have to reframe the benefits of blood sugar data and why we're doing it and the context around it. And I think this is maybe the most important mindset bright spot in the whole book, because with so many people wearing CGM now, you have more than enough blood sugar data, but it's also easy to ignore. It's easy to not be excited about it when you get a data point that's not what you expect. And so remember that plane analogy, the speedometer, next time you get a number that you don't expect. I like this quote from Jeff Hitchcock, who runs Children with Diabetes. He says, "The only bad blood sugar is the one you don't know." The Behavioral Diabetes Institute recommends actually putting a Post-it note on your meter that says, "It's just a number," as a kind of a reminder, which I really like too. Okay, the reason this is so important is because what we were told at diagnosis, it's all about food, exercise, and medication. You do those things, you'll have in-range blood sugars. I have done a lot of work in Diatribe to piece out what actually affects blood sugar. My original article was 22 factors. It's the most read Diatribe article of all time. We just updated this. There are 42 things that affect blood sugar. 42. And not all of these exist in isolation. So they all interact in really complicated ways. And so when we see a number that's out of range, and there's 42 variables that went into that number, most of which are out of our control, that's why it's so critical that we not see the numbers as tests and grades and judgments on how we're doing with our diabetes. So I actually added a whole new category to this on behavior and decision making, because I think it's an independent factor that affects blood sugar. So the book is actually not updated with this because the book came out in May, but the book has get the full list at, it's just, the URL's not on there. It's just diatribe.org/42 factors, and you can read the new ones I added and go back to the old one to see the other 22. But this is crazy. Can you guys believe what we deal with every day? So don't expect perfection is the other thing that I will say with this, even with the best tools available to us. You cannot achieve, it's very difficult to achieve non-diabetes blood sugars, but we can use data to make better decisions. We can take variables out. Another reason why I like eating low carb is because it pretty much eliminates the whole food section as a factor, because it's very, very predictable. And so I'm always looking for ways to make diabetes more predictable because of the madness that we're dealing with every day. Okay, and then the last mindset point I just want to emphasize is this idea of what questions are we asking, especially in those scenarios where things are frustrating and not what we expect. So you get that frustrating blood sugar. It's very easy to say, why is diabetes so unfair? How is this possible? I've done everything right today. How could I be so lame and mess this up again? Why did I eat that? What a dumb thing to eat. What will my parents say about this? What will my girlfriend say about this? It's very easy to ask these questions. They also lead nowhere. There is nothing productive about a single one of those questions besides making you feel terrible about how you're doing. So the beautiful thing is you can always reframe your questions. You can always ask different questions. What can I learn from this? What is one thing going well, even if it's small? How can I do that tomorrow? What can I do differently next time? This is a data point. What can I learn from this that I can try tomorrow? What experiments can I try this week? Are there different breakfasts we can try that would be useful? Diabetes is this like constant science experiment, and I think that's an awesome opportunity for all of us because we all have a tool between glucose meters and CGMs to measure the outcome and try something different next time. We're actually really lucky in that respect because not every disease has that ability. And so I think we should remember that, and we should also remember the questions that we're asking yourself. Something you can try is just spend a week writing down the diabetes questions that you're asking and just see are they productive or are they unproductive? And if they're unproductive, how can you change them to ask different questions? And then a last point on families, because I know there's a lot of parents in the room. This is one of my favorite quotes in the book. I think it is extremely powerful. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. It's so easy for two parties to get frustrated at each other when they haven't even talked about the core issues. So who in the room has a sharing policy? So when they share Dexcom CGM data, there's clear guidelines on when the parent reaches out and when they don't? How many don't have that? Yeah, so I think that would actually be productive to have that conversation. I know people who, they have very clear guidelines on when they reach out. So if you're low for more than 15 minutes, then we reach out. Or if you're low for more than 20 minutes, we reach out. And so having a system that's agreed upon by everyone in the family where the frustration levels are not going to rise, because right now a lot of communication isn't happening in diabetes. So people just kind of like find their way to it, and it can be frustrating. So just talking, even just talking with each other, hey, what frustrates you when you're managing your diabetes? Like, what really frustrates you that I do? Or what would be really helpful for me to start doing that would actually empower you to do better with your diabetes? That's a hard conversation to have, but it's also one that should happen, because we're all, like, this is 24/7. It's not going anywhere. So having clear guidelines, communication, boundaries between the family, I think is really helpful. How are we doing on time? I don't know who the timekeeper is. Jose, you're the timekeeper. We're good? Keep going? Is this, okay, if people have to leave, I will not be offended. I'll just touch on exercise and sleep a little bit. One of the things that the first bright spot in the exercise chapter of this book is walking. People don't think of exercise as walking. I feel like we're bombarded with like, are you doing the insane workout? Are you lifting tractor tires at lunch? It's ridiculous. So, those things are great for people who can find the time, who can do them, but walking drops me by 1 point per minute pretty much consistently. So when I'm high after a meal, I go for a walk. And I know it's potentially frozen tundra outside this time of year, but we have a walking treadmill desk actually at work, which is an awesome way. You can even buy a treadmill desk online or on Craigslist and set one up, or even just watch TV. Actually, one of my colleagues at Diatribe, he lost 100 pounds in a year. The way he did it was he just walked uphill on a treadmill while watching Netflix. That was his secret weight loss sauce. I thought that was pretty awesome. So when I'm walking uphill or I have insulin on board, I drop about 2 points per minute. So that means a 30-minute walk can take me from 200 to 130, 140, which I think is very, very powerful. Because again, taking variables off the table is very helpful. Has anyone ever said this? Well, I don't have an hour today, so I definitely can't exercise. Has anyone ever said that? Okay, one person in the audience has said that apparently. This is kind of one of my new mottos. Can I do 5 minutes? 5 minutes beats 0. And 0 is what I'm going to do when I say that. When I say that, it's going to be 0. So can I do 5 minutes? What's really important here is that consistency often beats outcomes in diabetes. So if you can be consistent about something, often the outcomes take care of themselves. But so often we're like, well, 5 minutes is really lame. That's not good. But if you can do 5 minutes every single day of the week, that beats doing 30 minutes once a week by far. So I often try to use that. When I hear myself saying something like this, I just say, can I do 5 minutes? And this actually applies in so many different ways. So, well, I don't have an hour, so I can't look at my data. Can I look at it for 5 minutes? Lots of ways to apply this in different areas of diabetes. The last thing, I'll just mention sleep really quickly. And obviously there's dedicated chapters on exercise and sleep. So sleep is such an underrated diabetes tool. So when I was a teenager, I'm sure one of the reasons I had such out of control blood sugars was that I did not get enough sleep. Sleep directly affects blood sugars. So when I get less than 7 hours, I'm higher the next day. Pretty much always. Not only that, I need way more insulin the next day just to keep the same level of blood sugar. And then there's all the sneaky indirect effects, like I crave more sugar and carbs when I don't get enough sleep. That's actually not very helpful. Precisely at the time when my blood sugars are higher and I'm more insulin resistant. So sleep is another one of these perfect storm variables that is something we can all change. We can get more sleep, usually. Not always. There's also a lot of tips and tricks in the book about just like how to have a better setup in your home so that you get more sleep, how much light to be exposed to at night. There's just all sorts of little tiny tips and tricks when you're having caffeine, when you're cutting it off at the end of the day. So getting more sleep is actually, if you want to improve diabetes, like one of the best ways to have an impact immediately. This is a great example of what I call diabetes landmines in action. So this was a day last February where I was at the JDRF Chicago, and I was doing a presentation on technology, and they wanted me to do this morning show interview, and at the time I was in San Francisco. So it was super, like 4 a.m. in San Francisco for a 7 a.m. Chicago time thing. So I only got 4.5 hours of sleep. I did not eat that morning because I wasn't hungry. So all I had for breakfast was stress and nerves. And then the only caffeine I had was from green tea. You can see I went from 95 to 187 in 30 minutes from lack of sleep, stress, and caffeine. No food, not a single bite of food. So this also goes back to those 42 factors. Like, this is the kind of stuff we're dealing with. So, but it would have been better had I got more sleep, for sure. I mean, the stress still might have raised my blood sugar, but at least with the sleep, I would have been off to a better start. This is the quote that starts the book. I think it's so important for us to remember this. The price of light is less than the cost of darkness. We are all so good at identifying the mistakes, about not getting data because we don't want a bad grade. But what are the things that are going well that we can replicate and multiply and do more of? That's what I really care about. And so when you read this book, please keep that in mind. There's actually an awesome guide at the end of the book. Every chapter has questions to help you find your bright spots and find your landmines. But also there's this really cool guide at the end of the book that kind of summarizes everything together. And I encourage you to fill this stuff out and actually take the time to do it, because it will save you so much time and frustration down the road to do this. So that's all I have. Thank you all for coming and listening and sticking around. I hope this was useful. If you have feedback, things that you found helpful, things that you don't understand, my email is just brightspots@diatribe.org or adam@diatribe.org. Please read the book and tell me what you think, because I always want to make things better for people with diabetes. And that's all I've got. Thank you.